What's up, metal and heavy music fans? These are my picks for the best metal albums of March. Alright, before I get into my picks, I do want to shout out Midnight with Let There Be Witchery, since I know some of you out there wanted to hear my thoughts on it. I know a lot of people seem to drool over this band, but I've never been overly impressed by their albums, and that continues to be the case, unfortunately, with this one.
Why do you hate fun?
I will say that of everything I've heard from them so far, this is probably the release that I've enjoyed the most, but it still just strikes me as a very mid-tier, forgettable outing. Not bad, but not something I'll probably remember in a few weeks, and I'm sure I'd enjoy this much more live given what I've heard about their shows. Now, if you want something in a similar style but done even better, if you ask me anyways, you should go with Bastard and Rotten Blood. This is a fantastic fusion of speed and black metal that I'd go so far as to call Motorhead with corpse paint. Start to finish, this thing is catchy as hell, a riff frenzy with a seemingly endless supply of primal energy, something I found to be a bit lacking at times in the Midnight recording. The punky rhythms are so damn infectious when combined with the fun little Tom G. Warrior-esque vocal punctuations and occasional gang vocal moments like on Spellbound. Admittedly, it does get a little samey and could be a few minutes shorter, but that aside, I got exactly what I wanted out of this album. Wailing guitars, foot-tapping D-beats, and a whole boatload of fuck you attitude make this a really great time for all listeners. Next up on the death metal side of things is Arkaik with Labyrinth of Hungry Ghosts via the Artisan Era. Now, I've been a big fan of this technical death metal band since 2015's Lucid Dawn, and the follow-up Nemethia only cemented them as what I consider to be one of the most underrated bands in the genre. A lot of bands do this same sound now, but few fuse melodeath, tech, progressive death metal, and even some symphonic elements in such a perfectly balanced way. Songs deliver on highly impressive arthritis-inducing musicianship, but always in service of memorable hooks and melodies. Wayward Opulence in particular is just brimming with them. Now, maybe it's just because I've been listening to so much more of this genre since I first discovered them, especially from the Artisan Era, but I will say that this album didn't hook me quite as much as the last one. But even so, it's definitely among the best I've heard this year so far, and doesn't have a single dud to pull it down either. Loving the exotic atmosphere on To Summon a Moria, further amplified by saxophone, flute, and strings, the symphonic touches on Broken Glass Apotheum, and that sudden Meshuggah-esque riff on Abode of the Deceiver. If you love bands like Obscura, Fury, Necrophagus, etc., you definitely need to check these guys out. Alright, throwing in another shout out here too to Hath with All That Was Promised. I was really wanting to enjoy this one, as Hath are definitely up-and-comers in the blackened death metal world, and I loved their EP Hive from like 2015. But just like with the previous album, I seem to be in the minority that just isn't getting all that much out of it. It's definitely not bad, with some of the cool dynamics on tracks like Decolation and Lithopedic standing out to me as real bangers. The drummer in particular is really killing it on the faster parts, but I don't know, for some reason it just gets a bit tedious for me, especially in the second half. Even after multiple listens, I still catch myself completely checking out in parts. Maybe it's just too doom and gloom for me right now. I also hear some parallels to Behemoth's The Satanist, but without some of the more earworm elements that made that album such a success. It has been growing on me a bit, but if you can figure out what you love about this album that's escaping me, let me know down in the comments. Alright, next up we have Vane FM with This World Is Going to Ruin You via Closed Casket Activities. So I debated still including this, but I ultimately decided I've always been one to give credit to music regardless of where it comes from, and to prove that I'm not just some hater of the band despite recent content.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Quite to the contrary, actually. 2018's Aerozone was easily one of the most punishing albums of that year, and one absolutely packed with strong contenders in the metallic hardcore genre like Harm's Way and Loathe. And if anything, their fusion of noisy, knocked loose fury with pummeling new metal grooves hits harder than ever Trespasser on tracks like Lights Out, The Killing Womb, and Inside Design, which even has a brief Slipknot-esque record-scratching section at the end. But much like the Dillinger Escape Plan, they also refuse to stay in one place, with tracks like the moody, piano-driven Whenever You Are and Funeral Sound, the early 2000s MySpace core vibes of Magazine Beach, and the crushing doom and gloom of Wavery. Definitely cool to hear them also continue to evolve on their already diverse and chaotic vocal performances as well. Honestly, I was not disappointed even for a second with this release. It fucking slaps. It brought back everything I loved about the debut while also expanding just enough to keep me interested for what comes next. I'd say alongside the likes of Code Orange and Loathe, Vane are ready to inspire the next generation of young and hungry fans out there, just like Slipknot and Deftones did for me so many years ago. All I ask is that if mistakes were made, just man up and make amends. Moving back over to black metal, we have Idol of Fear with Trespasser via Somnolence Productions. Idol of Fear is a Toronto band with an insidious serpent-like fusion of sound recommended for fans of Behemoth, Deathspell Omega, and Emptiness. I get a lot of black metal in my inbox, and the only reason I don't cover much of it is because a lot of it just sounds so similar. This, on the other hand, is one of those standout releases that goes well beyond the usual blueprint. Tracks really run the gamut stylistically from the godfleshy rhythms of the Flayed Horizon to the string-infused misery porn of Chirotonia. The guitars here are less traditional riffs and more of a slinking, shadowy presence that closes in and coils around the listener, preparing to squeeze. Quite frequently, I was reminded of Emptiness's fantastic Nothing But the Whole, but this may even reach new depths of darkness. When I talk about being fine with slower, more plodding music when it's done in an interesting and engaging way, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Then we have Acherontas, who I'm just going to keep calling Acherontas by their original name, with the Seven Tongues of Aman. Maybe I'll just call them the project formerly known as Acherontas, because even though the press release is as dense as a chapter in a history textbook, I still can't fully make sense of what happened here. Regardless, this is just the latest thematic iteration of the iconic underground Greek black metal band, one that has been around since 1996. They have always taken atmosphere to the next level, often feeling more like being in the midst of some chaotic spell casting than simply music, and in that respect, this album is no different. The shrieking tremolos, pounding drums, and harrowing chanting surround you like a whirlwind of pure evil. Check out Leviathan, The Fervent Scales in Reverence, just for a basic idea of what cinematic heights this music can truly reach. If I do have one criticism, it's that I do find myself wishing it threw in a few more weird curveballs to break things up and help it stand out like Idol of Fear, but honestly, this is still a top-notch release in the genre, and I have a feeling it won't be the last time you hear me talk about it. Switching gears again, we have Hellbore with Panopticon. This album has strong Lamb of God vibes, especially on tracks like All Men Are Created Evil, like if Lamb of God was still good. Really great mix here of melodeath and groove metal riffs with tons of energy and lots of little understated symphonic touches as well. I also enjoy the noodly jazz guitars and Hammond organ during the break on Terror Eyes before it erupts back into a deluge of blackened tremolos. Definitely shows the variety of performances that they're capable of. And then Necrocracy is another standout track with stellar performances across the board, from the bass and drums to the constant stream of guitar hooks. Speaking of which, these guys flex those symphonic elements even further alongside their progressive chops on the 3-part title track. If you enjoyed Lamb of God's track King Me like I did, then you'll appreciate finally getting to hear what more of that might sound like. The album itself is pretty concise at 40 minutes of headbanging, but it's impressive just how much they managed to squeeze out of that time. It's leaps and bounds better than anything Lamb of God have put out in years, definitely way better than that self-titled album, which I just didn't care for. Check this thing out. Then we have Animals as Leaders with Parrhesia. So I was actually pretty nervous going into this album after just how good The Madness of Many was, and while this doesn't quite reach that same high bar, Parrhesia continues to illustrate how animals as leaders dedicate themselves to always expanding and evolving their sound. Monomyth and Gordian Knight both deliver on the heavier side with high-octane Meshuggah energy. Gestaltzerfall really puts the atmospheric elements front and center for something that sounds like some epic sci-fi soundtrack, while The Problem of Other Minds also seems to go full-on Tron Legacy with the electronic elements. And then another personal favorite, Microaggressions, has an almost symphonic vibe to it, with initially subtle simulated strings growing in volume alongside a combination of fast neoclassical picking that makes it sound worthy of a performance at Carnegie Hall. Again, I'm not getting the same wow factor that I did from The Madness of Many, but it's definitely a solid album and another great entry into the band's strong discography. Check out the tier list for my thoughts on all of their albums. Then we have Sabaton with The War to End All Wars. Y'all, you know I've never really loved power metal, and I've always goofed on these guys whenever I saw band photos, but damn, is this album fun. In fact, count me a new full-fledged Sabaton fan because it inspired me to dig into their full discography as well, and there wasn't a single album that I didn't enjoy. They just seem to have such a mastery of atmosphere that has only gotten better with each subsequent release, and honestly, I think this may be the best representation of their sound to date. So if you like throwing your fists in the air and binging the History Channel, this is the album for you. Once more, check out the tier list for more detailed thoughts. Then definitely one of the top 3 releases of the month is Without Waves and Comedian via Prosthetic Records. Another one I've enjoyed previously with their 2017 album Lunar, this Chicago band defies concise genre labeling, traversing a wide variety of influences that include the Dillinger Escape Plan, Gojira, Devin Townsend, and Porcupine Tree. Opening track Good Grief alone runs quite the stylistic gauntlet over its relatively brief runtime. We're talking Mike Patton vocals on the intro, chaotic fusions of prog and mathcore riffs, blackened tremolos against pop-influenced singing, electronic effects. If I could make one direct comparison, it would probably be to my homies in Torrential Downpour, but these guys definitely do their own thing. I love albums where every single song has something a bit different to offer, and Comedian definitely delivers in that department with both ragers like Algorithm, more progressive, expansive content like Set and Setting, or the vaguely Opethy Do What Scares You and Slight in Shadows. Sleep Deep even sounds like a weird cross between Deftones and Tears for Fears. And while I definitely had some issues with inconsistency on the last album as a result, this time they have definitely managed to effectively utilize and pull together every last minute despite going even longer on the runtime. It does lean heavily into the softer stuff towards the end, but it seems in service of the overall effect. And then y'all, this has been a year of upsets already where a band I previously didn't really care about drops an absolutely killer album and becomes my favorite album of the month, and Ghost did that for me in March with Impera. And honestly, after taking the dive with all of their previous albums, I believe Impera is at least on the verge of becoming their best. The amount of variety on display here is phenomenal, and all the while also providing hit after hit with both catchy choruses as well as some of their heaviest moments to date. It's a hunter's moon. Ghost touch on so many classic influences with this record, from Rush and Van Halen to Faith No More and Danny Elfman, and all the while within a focused, perfectly honed concept without an ounce of filler. Once more, check out my Ghost tier list for extended thoughts on this album and the full discography, but despite what it lacks in the pure metal ethos of some of these other records, it's still my favorite thing that I cannot stop listening to this month. Y'all check out this playlist for more reviews and roundups of my favorite albums and songs from 2022 so far, and let me know down in the comments what was your favorite album this month. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.